From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NOCO, a daily slice of Northern Colorado news and happenings. It's Tuesday, March 5th. I'm Erin O'Toole. And it's not just any Tuesday. Today is Super Tuesday, traditionally the biggest day for primary elections and caucuses across the nation. Here in Colorado, if you're an unaffiliated voter, you're able to vote for either the Republican or the Democratic candidates. Just make sure you return only one ballot. For more on the election and how KUNC is working to engage Coloradans in the democratic process, KUNC State House reporter Lucas Brady Woods joins me now. So, Lucas, Colorado is among the 16 states and one territory voting today, but our state has made some pretty big headlines ahead of Super Tuesday, hasn't it?
It has. It really began last year when a group of Colorado voters filed a lawsuit seeking to disqualify former President Donald Trump from the presidential primary ballot. And this was actually a group of unaffiliated and Republican voters that filed this lawsuit. And it went to the Colorado Supreme Court, which ruled late last year that it agreed with this lawsuit, and Donald Trump was disqualified from the presidential primary ballot.
But that disqualification was temporary. The Trump campaign appealed that ruling to the U.S. Supreme Court. A couple of other states, including Illinois and Maine, had also attempted to remove Trump from the ballot over his actions leading up to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. On Monday, the nation's highest court ruled unanimously that Colorado and those other states must keep Trump on the ballot. The justices ruled only Congress has the power to invoke the 14th Amendment, which bars a federal candidate from the ballot.
Exactly.
And in the meantime, there's also an effort right now to get Democrats to vote non-committed. And that is to pressure President Biden for ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war.
That's right. And we know in Michigan, which just held its primary, Arab and Muslim leaders were pushing the non-committed vote, and tens of thousands of voters ended up checking that box last week. And what that means is selecting non-committed or uncommitted implies that a voter is exercising their party vote, but not committing to the candidates on the ballot. So if enough voters check that non-committed or uncommitted box, it can mean sending delegates to the National Nominating Convention. In Michigan, the non-committed vote won 2 delegates.
All right. Well, Lucas, when it comes to voting, one focus that you have this election year as KUNC State House reporter is you are looking at engagement among young people. Tell us a little bit about that project.
We're really making an effort to base our election coverage this year on Coloradans, on voters, and getting information from them on their concerns, their questions about the election process. And we would love to do this so that we can really meet voters where they are and make our coverage voter-centric instead of candidate-centric, getting this information and presenting this, what the voters want to the candidates instead of going to the candidates and saying, what do you stand for? And then just presenting that to the voters. Now, this does take a little bit more work, right? We have to engage with the community, solicit responses, but the challenge is meeting people and bringing people into the fold who are unengaged. And of course, a lot of young people are unengaged, but not just young people. Lots of different people have barriers to voting for whatever reason. And, by getting this information and hearing voters and non-voters' concerns and questions about the voting process and the elections process, we can hopefully provide that information that they're not getting, connect them to the political process, and bring people on board with practical election information and helping people vote in an informed way. That's not too hard on them. That's easy. We want to make it easy for voters to use our information, our initiative, to get to the polls.
Well, speaking of young voters, we have one young voter with us today. Nick DeSalvo is Colorado State University's student body president. Nick, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I wanted to ask you about how you and your peers feel about voting. I realize I've been reading in a lot of different places and hearing that some young people feel a bit disillusioned right now. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I would definitely echo the sentiment that young people feel disillusioned. Not only do I serve in my role as student body president, but I'm a student first, and I'm a political science student at that. And so I have the privilege of this semester taking a small graduate level course. I'm an undergrad, but The class is about 7 to 8 people, folks with master's degrees seeking PhDs. These are folks who are highly engaged people. We talk about democracy all the time. And we had a conversation at length this week about the primary. And there was a student in the room who has her master's degree, and she said she sat looking at her ballot for an hour trying to decide which way to vote, and she still hasn't even filled out her ballot. And so I think that's really exemplary of where young people are feeling, even if you are engaged in the process.
Did she say what it was that had her, unable to make a decision? I mean, is it the number of candidates or is it something else?
It was dissatisfaction with the choices that she was presented in the primary. I didn't ask which primary she was voting in, but I think that sentiment is echoed kind of across the board with both parties. No one is really happy about the choices that they're given, but elections are ultimately binary choices in generals, and so we have to get there by some sort of process.
Right. Nick, what do you think are some ways to get more young people involved in the democratic process?
I ultimately think the focus on nationalization of politics has really gotten us in this sticky situation. I think people in general, but especially young people, you feel so disconnected from the process because these are decisions that are made by folks much, much higher in the chain than we are. But I think once people start to realize, especially young people, that the decisions that local governments make are the most impactful in everyday lives. And if we focused less on national politics and more on local and state politics, I think a little bit of that disillusionment would start to break down.
In your experience, are there a lot of people your age who don't vote in the primaries?
Yeah, and I think just generally, a lot of people don't vote in primaries as it is. Voter turnout is much, much lower in primaries than it is for general elections. But there's a saying in politics that process is power, and the folks who understand the caucus process in Colorado and have a good understanding of the primary process understand that when less people are voting in those elections, then you have more power to exert in who your chosen candidate's going to be. And the folks who know that process are the folks who have voted consistently in primaries. And that turns out to be not a lot of young people at the end of the day.
I feel like that could change this year. We'll see.
I hope so.
Nick DeSalvo, CSU Student Body President, and KUNC State House reporter Lucas Brady Woods, thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I appreciate you for having me.
Thanks.
And we want to know what you think. Are you concerned about things like election security, misinformation, or voter participation? Email your questions to elections@kunc.org. We'll put our KUNC election coverage team to work on finding answers. That's it for us today here on In the NOCO. We'll be back tomorrow with more of what's happening in northern Colorado. Robin Vincent is our executive producer. I'm your host, Erin O'Toole. Happy voting, and we'll see you next time.